Welcome to this training video on how to use AssetOptics for Salesforce Lighting Experience. Today is the second lesson in our series and it focuses on work management. On your screen you'll see the learning objectives for today's lesson. We'll start out by talking about some of the definitions, the overall work order object and the interrelated objects. We'll also have a look at the different record types for work order, as well as how to create a work order, update the statuses, and how the costing is done on the work order. We'll start with the definition of work order. The work order is the top-level document where costs are accumulated and an overall work status is tracked. And by status, I mean things like scheduled, in progress, completed. I have a work order here, preventive work order, open on my desktop. And we can see in the quick links pane over here on the right, or if we went to the related list, the same thing. There are several objects which are related to the work order, either in a master detail relationship or in a lookup relationship. One of those is an important one, planned stock. Planned stock, it defines the planned and actual stock items, or parts if you will, that are planned for use on a work order. When creating a work order, you will often know in advance what parts you mean to use on the work order, and those can be entered as planned stock items. Additional parts or stock items that are issued to the work order will also appear in this list. They will, however, say planned quantity 0 and then issued quantity as appropriate. Along with labor, this allows you to estimate the costs of your work order, which you can see down here in the work order cost section. And we'll see more of this as we progress. You can also accumulate miscellaneous costs to a work order. A miscellaneous cost is basically anything other than a stock item that is issued to the work order. So if you had to run out to the store to buy something to complete this work order, you could record that cost here. Likewise, if you had some outside labor that needed to be performed on this work order, you could put that charge right here, and that would accumulate down here in the actual miscellaneous costs section. Next are work tasks. A work task represents a single piece of work and optionally the craft that is performing that work. Planned labor hours are defined at the work task level, and task labor is recorded against the work task, and that can be recorded as regular, overtime, or double time hours. This particular work task is actually built from a standard work task. By default, all work orders will have one work task created when the work order is created, and that will have the same description as the description on the work order. You can optionally choose to create and use a library of standard work tasks, and that's exactly what we've done in this example. You can see it says standard diesel oil change for all delivery vehicles. That standard work task, which again can be used on any work order, already has the instructions built into it. So if we have a look at this one, we will see that the actual detailed instructions and the craft are specified already on the standard work task. Here we have the craft general maintenance, and you can see that the planned labor rate is $50. If we wanted to add an additional work task to this work order, we could do so. We could create one on the fly, or we could choose a standard work task, and that one might be associated with a different craft and of course would have its own set of instructions. So let's go back to the work order for a moment. Let's return to our work order. Some additional objects which are worth noting, work assignments. Assignments are optional, as are most of these things. Work assignment actually defines who is going to do the work. So in this case, I'm actually going to click this button that says New Assignment, and I'm going to choose a user other than myself. In this case, let's choose Tony. We will specify which work task on the work order is his to perform. In this case, there's only one. And I'll click Save. If there were another task on this work order, I could also assign it to Tony, or I could assign it to somebody else with a different skill group and with a different labor rate. But as we continue looking at work orders, one thing I want to emphasize up front is that Many of these fields, many of these objects are completely optional. So I'll be showing you quite a few things today, but just know that in the future, if you need to create a corrective work order, let's say, on a broken piece of equipment, it's as simple as clicking that New button, choosing the asset, in this case, the fermentation line, putting a description in, hitting save, and then adding a few details along the way. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a look at the different record types on the work order. In AssetOptics, there are 6 record types on the work order. 3 of them can be created by the end user, and 3 of them are created programmatically, typically through PM schedules or PM group schedules. If you go to the Work Orders tab or you click the New button, the user will be given the option of creating these 3 types of work orders. The corrective work order, the default, is your typical break-fix work order, your ad hoc work order in response to some sort of unplanned issue you're having with an asset, a broken pump, a leaking valve, that sort of thing. The second thing you see on your screen here is the model work order. A model work order is like a job template. It is the work order used by a preventive maintenance schedule to create preventive work orders, which are created by the software. When you build a model work order, you are essentially creating a work order that you want replicated and released according to a schedule, which could be based on a calendar or a meter or something like that. We'll see that in a moment. A work request is pretty much the same thing as a corrective work order, except a work request goes into an approval process. So in your organization, entry-level technicians might be assigned a user profile that only allows them to create work requests, whereas people with a maintenance manager or maintenance supervisor profile can create work orders directly. And if you choose to use work requests and submit them for approval, then that's just going to be the standard Salesforce approval process, which we can help you build. The other 3 types of work orders are preventive, route, and route stop. Each of those will be covered in a little more depth in the next lesson on preventive maintenance scheduling. So to reinforce some of the terminology we just quickly covered, let's build a couple of work orders as examples. In example 1 here, we'll build a corrective work order. I think we've already seen that you can go to the Work Orders tab and click New Work Order, choose the record type, and proceed. Maybe an easier way to do this is to start from the Equipment/Assets tab. Most work orders are going to be created against a specific piece of equipment, that is an asset ID. So starting from this list is probably the easier thing to do. Let's choose this hot water tank here, for example. From this asset record, there's an action button here in the header that says New Work Order. By clicking that button, it will automatically start a new corrective work order on this asset. We can quickly enter a description. We can give further, longer description or a scope of work here. We can assign a priority. We can click Save. So here we have the outline of a work order. At this point, we've added very little detail to the work order. We've done no scheduling, and we've added no parts. What we are looking at here is the asset ID, the asset description, and other fields that would have been inherited from the asset record when we created the work order using that quick action, such as the location. But let's go ahead and add some planned stock. We know that we need, let's say, a seal. And we need 2 of these. I'll add another piece of plan stock. You'll notice you can optionally specify a need by date. There's also a button here that says commit inventory. That's for a later lesson, but based on the status of the work order and when it's due, this will tell the software to put a commitment on that inventory, to reserve that inventory so that it's available only to this work order. One thing you will notice, if we scroll down to the work order costs section, we will see that there are now total planned work order costs, planned inventory costs, and planned labor costs. The inventory costs are the accumulation of the planned stock items. So if we go back up to the planned stock items, we can see that together, based on the dollar amount, the inventory cost of each of these and the quantities planned, it has accumulated up to a charge of $32. The planned labor cost here, this is from the standard $50 an hour labor rate associated with the work task. And the planned duration is 1 hour on that work task. We can adjust that as necessary. I'm specifying 3.5 hours. Additionally, I'm going to select a specific craft, in this case a technician level 2, and you can see that person's labor rate as $65 an hour. Now when I return, I can see that the planned labor costs have gone up to $227.50. That's the planned labor rate times 3.5 hours. We might need some miscellaneous costs, and we can plan those miscellaneous costs. I'm going to use the Related tab here. The Related tab and the Quick Links Related links, they're the same thing. Sometimes it's easier to use one or the other. It kind of depends on personal user preference. I'm going to say, I'm going to optionally choose a vendor here. Let's say Granger. And this is just a $5 item. Returning to the work order. Again, we see planned miscellaneous costs, planned inventory costs, planned labor costs. At this point, however, no actual costs have been accumulated because the work hasn't been performed and the stock items and miscellaneous costs have not been issued yet. This work order was created in a status of approved. Remember, this one was not subject to an approval process. That would have been a work request. This is a work order. I'm going to go ahead and bump this one up to a status of in planning since we are actually planning this. I'm going to specify a due date. And I'm also going to schedule a start date. Updating these statuses can be a good practice for planning purposes. Sometimes, though, when you change the status, it will affect other fields on the work order. So now I'm changing the status to in progress. And when I did that, the actual start date field here automatically populated with today's date. You'll note that in this example of a corrective work order, everything's been kept pretty simple. I didn't actually put any instructions in here at all. I could include instructions here if I wanted to give the user some actual direction as to what to do, but I created this work order for myself. This is a rich text field. I could insert a hyperlink, I could insert a photograph, I could insert really anything I wanted. Additionally, I could add or edit work tasks as we saw in the previous example. I could also create a work assignment. And here I'm actually just going to assign it to myself. I'm searching WT for work task, and this is just the standard one that was created by the creation of the work order. So now that I'm in progress, as I said, I can actually go to the work task here, and even though we haven't added any further detail, I could actually start or stop the task. And what that does is it starts to accumulate time so that an hour or 2 hours from now, when I stop this task, it has created a time entry record. I could also simply enter my time, new time entry. I could specify the date, the number of hours, and click Save. Now we see the actual labor hours starting to accumulate on this work task. If we return to the work order, likewise, we will start to see these costs accumulate. Now we have planned versus actual labor hours. Now, as it turns out, I have a labor rate of 0 because I have not updated my profile here. So it says 0 labor costs. Even so, we can look at the task labor record just to confirm that. So I'll go up here to the time entries link. Here we see the hour and a half I accumulated, yes, and it says actual labor cost 0. I simply don't have a rate assigned to me. If we go back to the work order, we can also issue parts. So we have these 2 planned stock items, quantity of 1 for each of these. If I go to this planned stock record, I can click this issue button. And at this point, it will ask me to choose the bin location and the quantity and confirmed. Inventory management will be a little bit later on, a different lesson. But what I've done here is I've directly issued a part to my work order. Depending on your organization and whether you have a storeroom manager, technicians might not be able to issue parts to themselves. They might instead create a stock issue request. So here on the header of the work order, we have this button that says Create SIR, Stock Issue Request. And what that is essentially a pick ticket for the storeroom personnel. Now we've already issued one of the 2 requested parts to our work order, so when I invoke that action, it's only going to return the number of items that I have still open on that work order. So here I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to create the SIR by clicking this button, and now that's linked to the record. Reviewing our work order costs, we now see that we have planned and miscellaneous costs corresponding to the actual inventory issued versus the planned inventory issued. And as we continue adding task labor to this work order and issuing parts to this work order, those costs will continue to accumulate. And while we haven't exhausted every possibility, nor have we filled out every field or looked at every permutation of what you can do with a work order, I think this is probably a sufficient introduction to a corrective work order. So we'll move on next to creating a model work order. In this second example, we're going to look at how to create a model work order. As we defined it earlier in the lesson, a model work order is a job template. It is the work order that is used by a preventive maintenance schedule to create and release preventive work orders according to the scheduling logic of the PM schedule and against the assets associated with that PM schedule or schedules. Like any work order, it can have tasks. It can also have planned stock. Model work orders can be very simple or they can be rather complex. It's really up to you. I would note that some care should be taken when creating a model work order, as again, it will be replicated many times, perhaps weekly, perhaps monthly, or every 800 hours, or every 5,000 miles. So just take some care in how you create the model work order. Here we see some on the screen, and we'll look at a couple of these as examples. This one's called monthly maintenance, and it's on an asset group called APV load pumps. As you can see, there are no work tasks associated with this model work order, but there are instructions, and they are presented here as text in the comments section of the work order. Here's another model work order called Oil Change Service. I believe we saw this one earlier in the lesson. This particular model work order has a work task associated with it called Standard Diesel Oil Change for all delivery vehicles. The instructions for that work task are within the work task itself. There are also planned stock items for this particular work order. We have oil and we have an oil filter. So according to the PM schedule to which this model work order is attached, every time this is released, it's going to have the same planned stock on it. So the costs associated with this work order will be replicated over and over again. And as the inventory costs, the unit values of these stock items change over time, the estimated cost to perform this work order will also change over time. Again, looking at our list of model work orders that already exist, we'll notice that several of them have some periodicity kind of mentioned in the description, monthly, weekly, quarterly. This can be a pretty good idea as preventive maintenance schedules are built on timelines or built on meters, yet they don't have these sort of descriptions in the title. So it's up to you, but it's not a bad idea when creating a model work order for something like annual service to call it something like annual service. Let's get started and just click the new command button here to begin a work order. This time we're going to choose this second record type, model work order. We're going to enter a description for the model work order. This one will say is annual service on rotary pumps. We can optionally specify an asset group. Asset groups were covered in lesson 1, but basically these are assets of the same type. Here I will say this is APV load pumps. And I'm actually going to begin entering instructions here. So landing here on the newly created record, it looks like other work orders that we've seen so far. The difference here, of course, is that model work order is specified as the record type. You will also see that a work task has been created by default, as it has been done with the corrective work orders. There's no craft specified. The planned hours are set to 1. We can edit that, and in fact, we will edit that. Again, this looks a lot like other work orders we've done so far. We have instructions here in the detailed comments section. We could optionally add standard work tasks or additional work tasks to this work order. In fact, let's go ahead and do that now and add another work task. And we're just going to call this task 2. We'll specify a sequence on this, and we will say that an electrician must inspect before returning to service and now we have the model work order with 2 work tasks specified. We probably want to add some planned stock. The instructions say we have to replace all the seals, so we will search our stock item inventory for various seals, and I'm just picking this random. We'll need 2 of those. And another one of these O-ring seals. So now we have 3 planned stock items for this particular model work order. As we look at the work order, we can see that there are planned labor hours and costs associated with those labor hours and planned inventory costs. We have a total planned work order cost of $236.75. In the next lesson, we'll see how to create a preventive maintenance schedule. And a PM schedule will use these model work orders to release preventive work orders against the assets. And that concludes Lesson 2. If you have questions or need more assistance, feel free to reach out at the following email address or via our website.